I don't usually pick up hitchhikers. Hell, I never do. But that night, I made an exception. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was driving along this desolate stretch of highway cutting through the woods outside of Asheville, North Carolina. No streetlights, no other cars, just my high beams carving a path through the endless black. I had the radio turned low, just static and bits of some country song crackling through the speakers. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. Then I saw him. He was standing just past a mile marker on the side of the road, his figure barely illuminated by the faint glow of my headlights. Tall, lean, dressed in dark jeans and a plain gray hoodie with the hood pulled up. He wasn't waving, wasn't holding out a thumb, just standing there, staring straight ahead like he was waiting for something. I don't know what made me slow down. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe just that gut instinct that tells you someone might really need help. But I eased off the gas and pulled over a few feet ahead of him, my hazard lights flashing in the darkness. He didn't move at first. Just stood there. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, suddenly second-guessing myself. I wasn't even sure why I stopped. The guy gave me a weird feeling, something about the way he just stood there made my skin prickle. Before I could change my mind, the passenger door opened and he slid in without a word. That's when the uneasiness started to settle deep in my stomach. Up close, he was younger than I expected, mid-20s, maybe? His face was pale, almost sickly under the dim dashboard glow. His hoodie was zipped up tight, his hands buried in the front pocket. He smelled faintly of something stale, like damp clothes left in a basement too long. But the worst part? He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, his face blank, like I wasn't even there. Hey, I said, forcing a nervous chuckle. You need a ride somewhere? Silence. I swallowed. My fingers tightened on the wheel. All right then, I muttered, shifting the car into drive. The highway stretched ahead, endless and empty. I tried to focus on the road, but I could feel him there, just sitting, unmoving. Not a sound. Not a single shift in his seat. I kept stealing glances at him out of the corner of my eye. His hood was still up, casting a shadow over his face, but I could see his jawline sharp, rigid, his lips pressed together in a straight line. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the tension. So, where you headed? Nothing. My stomach twisted a little. Maybe he was mute? Or just didn't want to talk. Whatever the case, I wasn't about to press him. We drove in silence. The highway stretched endlessly in front of me, winding through the dense woods. The trees loomed tall, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The further I drove, the more the road seemed to narrow, swallowed by the creeping darkness. I stole another glance at him, through the rearview mirror this time. My heart stuttered. He wasn't looking straight ahead anymore. He was staring at me. His head had turned just enough that I could see one eye, peering at me from under the hood, unblinking, dark. I sucked in a sharp breath and snapped my eyes back to the road. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Don't freak out. Don't freak out. It's just a guy. Just some weird, quiet guy. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe he didn't trust me either. That was normal, right? The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I could feel the weight of his stare pressing into the side of my face. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. You okay, man? My voice came out shakier than I intended. He didn't answer. Didn't move. Just watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. My mouth had gone dry. I glanced at the mirror again. Still staring. I was gripping the wheel so tightly now that my fingers ached. The road felt endless, stretching forward into the abyss, no turn-offs, no landmarks, just an infinite tunnel of blackness. I swallowed hard. My pulse pounded in my ears. And then, a shadow moved. Not in the mirror. Not outside. In the back seat. I nearly slammed on the brakes. My heart leapt into my throat. He hadn't moved. He was still sitting there, rigid, motionless. But something in the darkness behind him had shifted. A trick of the light? My exhausted brain playing tricks? I forced a breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I needed to get a grip. I was just freaking myself out. But then he spoke. Soft. Low. Almost a whisper. You should keep driving. My breath caught. His voice was flat, emotionless, almost hollow. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I didn't know what to say. The road stretched on, the trees pressing in closer. The darkness thickened, swallowing the car whole. And in the mirror, his eyes never left mine. The air in the car had changed. It was heavier now, thick like humid summer air before a storm, but colder, pressing against my skin like damp fingers. My breathing felt too loud in the silence, my own pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Something about the way he said it, "You should keep driving," made my throat close up. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a warning. It was a command. I kept my eyes on the road, my fingers locked around the steering wheel. The highway was still empty, stretching into endless blackness. I couldn't shake the feeling that the road looked different than before, tighter curves, taller trees, as if the landscape was subtly changing, warping just enough to feel off. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn? But that didn't make sense. I had been driving in a straight line. The stranger still hadn't moved. He just sat there, hood up, face shadowed, his posture eerily stiff. But I could feel him watching me. I chanced another glance in the mirror, and my stomach flipped. His reflection wasn't right. He was sitting completely still, but in the mirror, his head was tilted at an unnatural angle, his neck bent too far, his eyes locked onto mine with a dead, glassy stare. His mouth was slightly open, as if mid-whisper, but his lips weren't moving. I snapped my eyes back to the road. No, I was just tired. That's all. My brain was playing tricks on me. I forced out a nervous chuckle, trying to ground myself. So, you got a name? Nothing. I swallowed hard. My throat was so dry it felt like I had swallowed sand. I tried again, forcing some kind of normalcy into the thick, choking silence. I was heading home from my sister's place. Thought I'd be. A sharp, metallic click. My breath hitched. The seatbelt. His seatbelt had just unbuckled. I didn't look at him. I didn't dare. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles turned white. The pressure in my chest swelled, every nerve in my body screaming at me to not look. My foot pressed down harder on the gas. I didn't even realize I was speeding until I saw the needle creeping toward 80. And then, a whisper. So soft, so close to my ear it sent an icy shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't have stopped." A sharp breath caught in my throat. My whole body locked up. He was in the passenger seat. I knew he was still in the passenger seat. I hadn't heard him move. But that whisper had been right next to my ear. I clenched my jaw, my breath shuddering out in uneven gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I was exhausted. My mind was twisting shadows into something they weren't. I finally forced myself to glance at the mirror again. And the breath in my lungs died. His reflection. It was smiling. Not a normal smile. Not a friendly smile. It was wrong. His lips stretched wide, too wide, teeth gleaming in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, his head still tilted at that sickening angle. But in the seat beside me he wasn't moving. His face was still blank, expressionless. I slammed my foot on the brakes. The car skidded, tires screeching against the pavement. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I didn't think, I just acted. "Get the fuck out." My voice was shaking, barely a whisper. The car had barely stopped moving when I reached for the door handle, throwing it open as fast as I could. "I don't care where you're going, just get out, The seat was empty. The passenger seat. Empty. I turned so fast my vision blurred, my breath catching in my throat. The back seat. He was in the back seat now. My whole body went ice cold. My limbs locked up. He was sitting directly behind me, staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable, his hands folded neatly in his lap. I could barely breathe. My hands were trembling, my entire body screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of the car, to do anything but sit there frozen like a rabbit in a snare. I gripped the door handle so hard my fingers ached, but I didn't move. Because I saw something. In the rearview mirror. A third reflection. Behind him. Something else was sitting in the back seat, cloaked in the shadows, its shape shifting, writhing, watching. And then, just as my brain could register what I was seeing, the headlights cut out. The car engine died. And the darkness swallowed us whole. The engine cut out so fast it was like something had ripped the life from it. 1 second, the dashboard lights were glowing, the soft hum of the car filling the silence, then nothing. Pitch black. The road vanished. The trees outside disappeared. The only sound was my own shaky breath, ragged and uneven in the suffocating quiet. I slammed my palm against the ignition button. Nothing. Not even a click. The power was completely dead. Cold panic crept up my spine, tightening around my chest like a fist. I wasn't just stuck on a dark road. I was stuck in the dark with him. I turned my head slightly, my breath hitched in my throat. He was still in the back seat. Unmoving. I couldn't see his face anymore. It was too dark. Just the vague outline of his hooded figure sitting perfectly still behind me. But I knew he was looking at me. Watching. And worse, I wasn't alone with just him. I could feel it. The air was wrong. Heavy. like the inside of the car had grown bigger, stretching into unseen corners, making space for something else. Something I couldn't see, but could sense, lurking just beyond my vision, pressing against my skin, filling the space around me like an unseen fog. Something was behind him. A trembling breath slipped through my lips. My fingers clutched at the door handle so hard my knuckles ached. I needed to get out. Slowly, carefully, I shifted in my seat, my other hand reaching for my phone. If I could just turn on the flashlight. A sharp, wet breath sounded from the back seat. I froze. It was quiet. Almost too quiet to hear. But it was there. A slow, deliberate inhale, ragged, gurgling like something struggling to breathe. Not his breath. Something else's. It was sitting right behind him. My pulse jackhammered in my skull. My body refused to move, like my brain was trying to keep me still to not provoke it. Then in the silence I heard it. A whisper. Low. Garbled. Not English. Not words. Just a wet, crawling sound slipping from the darkness, curling around my ears, seeping into my skull like cold fingers. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. Then, a click. My phone screen lit up. And for half a second, just half a second, I saw it. The light cut through the backseat darkness, carving out the shapes behind me in horrific clarity. Him. Sitting there, hood still up, face turned toward me, expression blank. But behind him, a shape. Bent. Twisted. Its head too long, stretching up toward the roof of the car, its limbs unnatural, jagged. Its skin, gray and raw, like something skinned alive and left to dry. And its face. Oh God, its face. Stretched wide, flesh hanging, mouth yawning too open, a black hole lined with teeth, rows and rows of jagged, uneven teeth. My brain barely processed it before my survival instincts kicked in. I screamed. Not a normal scream, a primal one, a raw, broken sound ripped straight from my chest. I flung the door open, throwing myself out of the car so fast I hit the ground hard, my palms scraping against the rough asphalt. I scrambled backward, kicking against the pavement, my hands slipping on loose gravel. My body moved on instinct, crawling, running. The car remained motionless, its interior swallowed by the void. The door still shut. The engine still dead. And then, the passenger door creaked open. Not fast. Not violently. Slow. Deliberate. My breath hitched, my vision blurred with terror. I couldn't see him anymore. I couldn't see it. But I could hear them. Footsteps. Slow. Approaching. Coming for me. I scrambled to my feet, my body screaming for me to run. And that's when I saw it. The road. It wasn't a highway anymore. I had pulled over on a straight road in the woods, but that's not where I was anymore. The pavement had changed. It was cracked, worn, old, like it had been abandoned for decades. Faded yellow lines, crumbling asphalt covered in thick weeds. And the trees. They were wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Their branches stretched upward, curling toward the sky like skeletal hands. The air smelled damp, rotting, thick with something foul. This wasn't the road I had been driving on. This wasn't the same place. The footsteps behind me grew closer. A choked sob caught in my throat. I spun around, my legs trembling, my entire body locked in terror. And then, I heard him speak again. A whisper. Calm. Soft. Like a voice curling into my ear from somewhere far away. You should have kept driving. I don't remember making the decision to run, I just did. My body moved on pure terror, feet slamming against the cracked pavement as I tore down the road, my breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. The trees loomed overhead, their branches stretched and twisted like fingers reaching for me. The air was thick, damp, wrong. It smelled like wet earth and something rotting, like old meat left in the sun. I didn't know where I was running. I just knew I had to get away. But the footsteps behind me, they didn't rush. They didn't chase. They just followed. Slow. Deliberate. A steady, patient rhythm against the pavement. Tap. 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 Like whoever or whatever was behind me knew I had nowhere to go. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't. Then ahead of me, a house. It appeared like it had always been there, just beyond the next curve in the road. A sagging old farmhouse, barely standing, its windows gaping black holes. The front porch was tilted, the roof caved in at one corner. But right now it was shelter. I had two choices. Run into the woods or go inside. I didn't think. I turned sharply, nearly stumbling as I bolted for the house. The front door was open. Not wide, just a crack swinging slightly in the night breeze. I didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. I shoved the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it behind me so hard the wood splintered. Darkness. The air inside was worse than outside, thick with the stench of mildew, dust, and something sour. The floor beneath me was uneven, boards rotted and warped. I pressed my back against the door, heart pounding so violently I thought I might pass out. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, still in my pocket. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the hallway ahead. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, streaked with what looked like old blackened handprints. The silence inside was unnatural, like the house was holding its breath. I could still hear the footsteps outside. Slow. Approaching the house. Tap. Tap. I staggered backward, moving deeper into the hallway. My breath hitched as I forced myself to look around. There was no furniture. No signs of life. Just rooms, dark, empty spaces where light didn't seem to reach. The wooden floor beneath me groaned with every step. I reached a staircase leading down. A basement. The last place I wanted to go. But when I heard the front porch creak, I didn't have a choice. I ran. Down, 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 each step moaning under my weight. The air grew colder, damper, heavier. I hit the concrete floor, my phone's flashlight flickering weakly against the damp, moldy walls. And then, something breathed behind me. A sharp, wet inhale. Not human. Not right. I spun, phone light swinging wildly, and saw it, standing in the corner of the basement. Tall. Too tall. Bent, stretched. Its limbs were wrong, unnaturally long fingers curled into jagged points. Its skin was gray and raw, glistening in the dim light like something half-rotted. And its face. Oh God. Its mouth hung open, a yawning black void lined with rows of jagged, uneven teeth. Its eyes, no, not eyes, just two black hollow sockets that seemed to pull the light in. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Then, it moved. Not like a person. Not like an animal. It twitched, jerking forward in unnatural glitching movements. 1 second in the corner, the next in front of me. The phone light flickered. The air turned freezing. And then I felt it. Its breath against my face. Hot. Wet. Rotten. And the last thing I heard. A whisper. Right in my ear. You should have kept driving. I don't remember screaming. I should have. Everything in me should have screamed. But I couldn't. The moment that thing whispered in my ear, my body shut down. Every muscle locked up, frozen in sheer animal terror. My throat clenched so tight I couldn't even suck in a breath. The light on my phone flickered, and in that split second I saw it up close, its face inches from mine. That mouth. That gaping, jagged, black hole of a mouth. I could smell it. Rot. Damp. The scent of something ancient and wrong. And then, it touched me. I didn't see it move, didn't see the hand reach out. But suddenly I felt it. Something cold and wet wrapping around my wrist. Not fingers. Not a hand. It was too smooth, too slick, like skin that had been soaked in water for weeks, bloated and soft with something hard underneath. My mind shattered into static. I jerked backward so hard I slammed against the wall, my phone flying from my grasp and hitting the floor with a sharp crack. The light died instantly, plunging the basement into a suffocating void. I was blind. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against damp concrete, legs kicking uselessly at the floor. My breath came in frantic, heaving gasps, my ears ringing from the rush of my own pulse. And then, a click. A wet, snapping click. Then another. And another. That sound, it was like teeth snapping together, like bones popping out of sockets. It was all around me. I couldn't see, but I knew it was moving. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was shifting, rearranging itself in that jerking, unnatural way, coming closer. I reached out blindly, searching for anything, a weapon, a door, something to grab onto. My fingers found something sharp, a jagged piece of wood, maybe part of a broken chair leg, maybe a splintered beam. I didn't care. I swung it wildly, my breath ragged, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs, and I hit something. A dull, wet thud like striking raw meat. For half a second, everything stopped. No breathing, no clicking, just stillness. Then, a scream. Not human, not even animal. It was a sound that shouldn't exist, a high-pitched, guttural wail that ripped through the air like nails on metal, deep and endless and suffocating. The walls shook. The floor cracked beneath me. I felt something in my head, like a pressure, like hands pressing against my skull from the inside, trying to squeeze my brain through my ears. My vision exploded in red, nerves screaming in agony. I thought I was dying. I thought this was it. And then, the floor collapsed beneath me. 1 second I was in that basement, and the next, the ground caved in, sending me plummeting into the dark below. Falling. Forever. Then, I hit the ground. Hard. My vision exploded in white-hot pain, my ribs crunching against something solid. My ears were ringing so loud I couldn't hear my own ragged breathing. I tried to move, couldn't. I was in a new place. No more basement. No more house. I was on my back, staring up at a sky that wasn't a sky at all. It was black, deep and endless, but filled with shapes. Moving, shifting shapes that looked like arms, like limbs, like things twisting inside a massive stomach, rolling against each other. The sky breathed. I wasn't outside. I was somewhere else. I turned my head, my entire body trembling with cold and fear. The ground wasn't ground. It was flesh. A pale, pulsing surface stretched out in all directions, quivering under my weight like I was lying on something alive. It was wet like the inside of a mouth. And the worst part, the sound. A slow, distant heartbeat. Ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump. I tried to sit up. Pain flared through my ribs, sharp and deep. I pressed my hands to the ground to push myself up, and the ground pressed back. Something underneath the surface twitched. A slow, shifting movement, like a hand beneath a sheet. A lump moved beneath me, traveling across the fleshy surface. No, not one. Many. Shapes. Crawling. Sliding underneath me, all around me. I choked on my breath, shoving myself up to my knees, my legs sinking slightly into the pulsing floor. I didn't know where to go. There were no walls, no doors. Just this place. And then, I saw it. In the distance. Standing on the horizon of flesh and darkness. The man from my back seat. Still wearing his hood, his hands hanging at his sides. His posture, wrong. Too stiff. Too lifeless. I tried to speak, tried to ask what the hell was happening, but my throat locked up. Then, he moved. Not toward me, but away. Turning, walking toward something in the distance. A hole. A gaping void in the flesh ground, so black it seemed to eat the light around it. A door. Or mouth. He stepped inside it. And vanished. The second he disappeared, the ground beneath me lurched. Something underneath the surface moved fast. I heard it ripping toward me, the wet sound of something tearing through flesh. And then, something grabbed my ankle and pulled me under. I didn't even have time to scream. The flesh beneath me split open, and something wet and strong wrapped around my ankle. I was yanked down so fast my skull cracked against the ground. My vision exploded in white-hot pain. ***, my fingers scraped at the pulsing surface, nails bending back as I tried to claw myself free. But I was sinking. Flesh ripped open around me, tearing like a slit throat. My legs vanished into the hole, then my waist. And then I was inside it. Swallowed. It was tight, wet, suffocating. Flesh pressed against my face, squeezing my ribs until I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a throat. A tunnel of living tissue pushing me downward. I could feel it contracting around me, pushing me deeper. I thrashed wildly, my hands sliding against slick, pulsing walls. Every inch of me was coated in something thick and warm. The air, if you could even call it air, was humid, putrid, thick with the scent of rot and bile. I was in something's body, and I was going deeper. My chest started convulsing from lack of oxygen. My vision pulsed red. I could feel my heartbeat in my skull and my fingertips. I was going to die here. Then, I started hearing the voices. Soft at first. Faint whispers in the dark, threading through the wet sounds of shifting flesh. I wasn't alone. At first I thought it was just the ringing in my ears until the voices became clearer. Not one. Not two. Hundreds. Whispering, pleading, crying. Some muttering prayers. Others sobbing. And then I heard my own name. Ethan. I froze. That wasn't possible. The walls around me shuddered as if they were breathing. The tunnel of flesh narrowed, pressing tighter against my chest. The pressure was unbearable, forcing the air from my lungs. Then the whispers grew louder, overlapping, colliding, turning into a deafening chorus of panic. Help me. It's still hungry. It doesn't let us go. Run. And then something grabbed my wrist. A hand. Human. Cold. Bony. I couldn't see who it belonged to, but I felt fingers digging into my skin. And then suddenly, I stopped moving. The walls contracted violently, like whatever was pulling me down had been interrupted. For a moment, the whispers went silent. Then, the screaming started. Not human. Not even close. It was a sound of pure rage. A howl of something ancient and starved, echoing through the tunnel of flesh like a storm roaring through a cave. The walls around me shuddered, tensed, and I felt something massive shift below me. Whatever had me. It wasn't going to let me go. But the hand on my wrist, it pulled. Hard. I didn't think. I grabbed onto it. And suddenly, I was ripped backward. It felt like I was being yanked through a birth canal in reverse, squeezed, dragged, forced back through the tightening tunnel. The thing below me shrieked, a piercing, guttural wail of hunger and fury. The walls of flesh convulsed, rippling like waves of muscles spasming in agony. Then, I was out. I hit the ground hard, tumbling onto my back, gasping for air. My vision blurred. I was still covered in thick, wet slime, my limbs trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. But I was out. I tried to sit up, my breath hitching in panic, who had pulled me out. I turned and saw them. A man crouched a few feet away. Tall, thin, face hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. The man from my back seat. His face was wrong, like it had been stretched too tight, his skin gray and waxy. His eyes, if you could call them eyes, were just dark, sunken hollows. He wasn't breathing. Wasn't even blinking. But he was watching me. Waiting. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my voice nothing more than a hoarse, choking rasp. "WH, what is this? What the F*** is happening?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed behind me. I turned, and my heart stopped. The ground had split open where I had been dragged under. A massive, gaping wound in the fleshy surface, pulsing, oozing, still shifting. And something was crawling out of it. Not just one thing. Many. Shapes. Figures. People. One by one, they dragged themselves out, their bodies wet and wasted like corpses left in the ocean for weeks. Their skin hung loose, their faces distorted in permanent screams. Some had no eyes. Some had too many. They weren't alive. And yet they moved. They crawled, stumbled, reaching with trembling, broken fingers. And they were coming toward me. I turned back to the man, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. What the hell is this? His hollow eyes locked onto mine. And finally, he spoke. "The road doesn't end, Ethan. It only goes deeper." Then, the ground split open beneath me again. And this time, I had nowhere to run. I tried to run. I don't know where. There was no exit, no up, no down. There was just the road of flesh, the crawling things, and the man who wasn't a man. But instinct took over. I spun, bolting in the opposite direction. My legs were numb, trembling, coated in whatever that thing had spit me out of. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, my lungs burning from the thick, rancid air. Behind me, they were still coming. Their twisted, broken bodies dragged across the fleshy ground, hands reaching, mouths gasping in silent wails. Some moved on all fours, others jerked forward like puppets on tangled strings. And beneath my feet, the flesh twitched, like it was waking up. Like it was feeling me run. I was losing my mind. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. And then I saw it. Up ahead, a light. A faint yellow glow in the distance. A street light. Impossible. I kept running, lungs raw, heart threatening to burst. Every step sent a jolt of pain up my spine, my ribs screaming from the impact. The ground was changing. With every step, it became less flesh, more asphalt. The air became thinner, cleaner. The scent of rot and bile faded. And the road, it was back. An empty stretch of highway under a night sky. The streetlight ahead flickered weakly, casting a pale, sickly glow over the cracked pavement. I kept running. And then, the road beneath me shifted. I barely had time to react before the ground cracked open. A split in reality itself, a jagged, gaping mouth in the asphalt, tearing straight through the road. And something inside it. Something deep, writhing, endless. Like looking into a stomach that had never been full. I dug my heels in, trying to stop, but my feet skidded forward, right toward the edge. And that's when he grabbed me. A hand strong, cold, unyielding. I jerked back, collapsing onto my knees just inches from the pit. My body trembled violently, every nerve screaming. I turned, and it was him, the passenger, standing over me, his hood casting his face in deep shadow. But this time, I saw his mouth. A small, tight smile. Not human. Not malicious. Something worse. Something knowing. You made it far. His voice was like wine through dead trees. I stared, chest heaving, every instinct screaming at me to run, fight, something. But I couldn't. I just sat there, watching as he slowly crouched down, bringing his face level with mine. Not many do. I swallowed hard, the pit beside me shuddering, the whispers still echoing from its depths. What is this? I rasped. His head tilted, the dim glow of the streetlight reflecting off his hollow eyes. A road doesn't end just because you stop driving. He reached up, placing a finger against my forehead. And suddenly, I remembered. The long road. The dark highway. The turn I shouldn't have taken. The wrong path. The place between places. I had never picked him up. I had been picked. His smile widened slightly. And then, he stood, stepping past me toward the road. The streetlight flickered. He walked into the glow. And vanished. Just gone. Like he had never been there. The air around me felt thinner, lighter. The pit was gone. The whispers silent. I turned, chest still heaving. And I saw it. My car. Sitting in the middle of the highway, engine still running, door open. Like I had never left. Like none of it had ever happened. But I knew. I knew. I stumbled toward it, my limbs weak, my body aching with pain that felt older than my bones. I collapsed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with trembling fingers. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not even once. I just threw the car in gear and drove. I don't know how long, but when I finally saw the lights of a gas station, I nearly cried. I pulled in, the tires screeching against the pavement, and practically fell out of the car. The clerk inside saw me. I must have looked insane, covered in dirt, my skin pale, my eyes wild. I stumbled toward the counter, trying to form words, trying to say anything. But the moment I opened my mouth, I saw the television behind the counter. And I stopped cold. It was the news. A car crash. On a dark highway. My car. Totaled. Burned. The driver, me, dead at the scene. The world tilted. I staggered back, breath stuck in my throat. The clerk was saying something. Asking if I was okay. I wasn't. Because I finally understood. The road never ends. I had just taken a different turn. And I wasn't driving anymore. I was the passenger.